The expectations of food are higher than they've ever been. Food TV, celebrity chefs, and all these things are really mature concepts now. But we think about our generation where you ate what mom put on the table.
Yeah.
That's changed.
We want everything to be more sustainable, healthier in general, right? But we also want more availability and we want it now.
Interest in taste, want interesting food, healthy food, innovative food, thinking about how to eat food on the move. It's an initiative it's always alive within all of my clients. How do you create food that can be eaten on the move? We're on the move as a society. How you interact with food and how it's consumed affects all of us. And we all have our own interesting nuances as to how we like to consume it, when we like to consume it, and where we like to consume it.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Experts Uncut. Here with your host, Simon Rycraft. I'm excited to have with me actually a colleague from Tenzing, but a deep expert in our network on food and the restaurant business. So appreciate you coming on, Howard. How are you?
Great. Happy to be joining you, Simon.
Awesome. All right. Well, let me always go into a bit of background on who you are, and then I'll pass over the mic. Howard Graham. He's a long-term member of Tenzing. He's actually a director and a practice leader here for us at the firm. But his background is pretty unique. So he's worked in the grocery business. He's run restaurants. He actually operated an internet-based seafood specialties business. So I'm going to ask some questions about that when we get into it. But uniquely, he's also published a book and sold cookbooks on QVC, which is kind of cool. Howard works with us across clients and focuses on areas like buyouts, financial stress, entering new markets, optimizing operations, but generally with a focus on food and beverage. Howard's also taken on interim executive roles in the past, including interim chief supply chain officer at Feeding America, the large nonprofit in the US, where he helped them launch a nationwide network of regional produce cooperatives, helping those most in need gain access to healthier food, which I think is admirable and pretty cool. So excited to have Howard on. And it is a Friday. I don't know when we've edited this, if it will be going out on a Friday. So I'm catching him at the tail end of a pretty extensive and busy week. So I appreciate your time. But let's kick into it. I think, when you and I first met, we were just talking about general food procurement, food supply chain, and you just went off on another whole direction and path that I think I hadn't really even thought about. And it's one of the things I love about our Tenzing platform is the depth of expertise and the very background of people that operate in our network. But how did it all get started, right? I'm sure you necessarily opened your first restaurant when you were 15, and then it's never look back. I mean, how did you first get into to the food business?
Yes, I think it's an interesting confluence of one sort of hands-on experience. One, starting as an early teenager, my cousins were very successful in the Italian grocery wholesale business. They also had retail storefronts in Pittsburgh, a lot of notoriety around their business. And it was a very exciting place to work as a young teenager, right? For example, when Luciano Pavarotti came to Pittsburgh, the first stop on his tour was Sinceri's grocery store, right? So when the largest wheel of Reggiano Parmesan cheese was ever created, where did they display it? They displayed it at Sinceri. So, right, there's this very romantic sort of nostalgia around having worked in that business. And as you know from the firm, right, everyone mentions, oh my God, Howard's part of that extended family. It was a very exciting place to be. And also too, to, have the mentorship of just sort of an appreciation of food, right? So, we're this very commercial, cost-driven, efficiency-driven part of the business, but the original passion was, being around folks who could really teach me what fine food looks like. Not culinary food, but just in its raw form. Mm-hmm. This is a great piece of prosciutto di Parma. This is a great piece of cheese, right? And taste this, right? And enjoy and see the difference between the milk from a goat versus the milk from a cow. Those kind of things, right? I mean, it was really interesting to be in that environment and continually learning about the different qualities and nuances of food. And then, I get into consulting after business school, right? And I learned this heavy commercial bent of consulting and cost optimization and these types of things. And then spent some time in the restaurant business, actually built 5 restaurants, started a specialty foods business, had some success selling cookbooks on QVC. So the journey continued, right? And then as I transitioned back to management consulting, it was a natural place to hang my hat. I'll actually circle back to one other thing too. My undergraduate education was in economics, and you think about really something that is an example of economics, basic supply and demand. True commodities like food, ingredients, crops are an incredible reflection of true supply and demand at all times, right? There isn't a ton of margin in it. The prices are constantly moving. There's tons of there's tons of transparency in those markets. So that part of it resonated with me as well, right? So I take this passion for the food business that developed at an early age. I have some formal education that informs an additional layer and lens to my point of view. And then you layer in management consulting. And then as I transition back to management consulting, I've said, it's the one area within the firm or within large firms where the expertise isn't truly resonant. There aren't a lot of people there's lots of people in financial services, insurance, all these even manufacturing, lots of folks there. But in the food business and sort of a deep understanding of agricultural commodities was something that wasn't there. And I decided that's where I'd hang my hat, right? I'll be the foods guy, right? I know enough. I have this hands-on experience. I'll be the foods guy, and that'll be my entry point back into consulting, right? And of course, the firm grabbed onto that, right? Tom saw that opportunity to say, wait a second, this guy has a very unique set of experiences, unique point of view. Let's see how far we can run trying to pick up more clients in the space. And certainly it's only enriched my point of view, right? We see some very interesting situations. I have access to very interesting people. And I say, it's only continued to enrich my understanding of the business and the nuances that I continue, or I should say only reinforce my belief. It's a really unique place to operate. Thinking about the agricultural supply chain and how you go from, as Tom likes to say, from barn to belly is the Tom McLeod phrase, sort of field to table type approach. And that learning that really there's a unique culture within the business. There's more paradigms of cooperation in cost optimization are far more prevalent than just competitive pricing paradigms, right? The parties in the value chain tend to work together in a much more integrated way because the producer faces so much risk, right? Pestilence to crops, crop loss, all these things, right, that affect availability. Look at the effect of organic crops in Ukraine, right? We have a war in Ukraine that wiped out a large portion of the supply of organic grains for the world, right? So this sensitivity to the producer and the pressures that they face it sort of engenders a sense of respect among the other parties as to how they're going to operate within the culture of this industry. And knowing that the margins are tight and they can be quite variable, thinking about our approach as a firm, or as I was asked to say, what is our approach? How are we going to do this differently than big firms? How are we going to put you in front of clients and have an original point of view? And I said, it's really about efficiency, right? You can't extort the different actors in your value chain. You actually have to figure out what is the optimal design? Who are the right partners at the right time? And how do I get them to work together to go from the field to the back door of my restaurant or the back door of a retail grocery outlet or whatever it may be, or the back door of a factory where those raw materials are then going to be turned into finished goods. So it's been an interesting place and an interesting time to operate. And I I've had an interesting opportunity to build a practice around some unique skills and unique perspectives. We've taken up a habit of sort of creating code names and nicknames for my experts in different areas. We've got the milkman, we've got we've got the chicken man, the multi-billion-dollar poultry buyer. We've got Mr. Extraordinary, who was sold his egg farm for $500 million to the largest publicly held egg company. So it's been a fun place right within the firm, and those those names are out of respect. It's not something that diminishes. It's sort of code names. We go, these are really extraordinary people that have extraordinary insights and skills that are now sort of resonant within me, right? It's the benefit
Mm-hmm.
of how we work, right? I'm learning from folks every day. That's enriching.
Yeah, no, I love that backstory, and fast forward to to some of the other people in the network that go down to the specific item, the product group, even the protein. Um, I've enjoyed having some conversations. I mean, even early stage with clients, and they haven't chatted with you before, and I say, okay, you got to meet this guy. If food and beverage is a product group, or there are certain subcategories that you want us to look at, or you need some different perspectives on, right? Like this guy ran restaurants, he's run distribution in the past, he knows the C levels across the supply chain that you're likely working with. And oh, guess what? He also, is the author of a book and has been on QVC. I love ending with that because you rarely bring it up when you give an overview of your background, but I think it's pretty cool and unique. We were even talking about, this was 2 weeks ago, and you often send me down a rabbit hole. You talked about the origin of chicken wings, because I think we were talking about protein. Is it
Yeah.
protein efficiency or protein
Yes.
optimization? So I was
Yes.
googling, where did chicken wings come from, and there's the whole elaborate story in New York, where someone who's running a pizza restaurant ordered chickens, and then accidentally ordered chicken wings by mistake, and then just decided to
Yeah.
cook them up that evening for her kids. I mean, it's just, there's so many things people don't necessarily know about things like food that they, obviously they interact with and eat on, 3 days, 3 times a week, or 3 times a day. Sorry, but um, what's been because you've worked in broad supply chain and transactions as well. Um, what's been a kind of a fun story, or a cool client? Obviously, confidentiality, you can't share names, but a kind of a cool program or project that you've worked on that's looked broadly across supply chain.
Yeah. So I think the one I'll lean on the most, that was the most fun, and it pulled in all the elements of food supply chain, was the merger of two of the largest casino operators in the United States.
Okay.
And they wanted to, as the two companies were coming together, both had a culture of allowing the individual properties to have a lot of freedom to buy what they want as long as they're making their margins, and the general manager at the property was making his P&L targets. Everything was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But as the businesses merged, there was a thrust to say, hey, let's really professionalize food and beverage, right? We know there's a lot of low hanging fruit here. We think there's opportunities to just institutionalize a better way to buy food and beverage and have it moved into our individual properties.
Mm-hmm.
And what was fun about it was that there was so much sort of training. I don't like to use the word education, but so much sort of illuminating for them. How does the food supply chain really work? And where do we want to buy it? How do we want to move it? Where do we want to store it? And that's how we'll optimize cost, instead of just negotiating prices for example, all the casinos had a big Mother's Day promotion with chocolate covered strawberries.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were buying strawberries at the peak of the market and then trying to measure savings on something that the market is going up, right? So how if I mean, from the month of April through the month of July, your prices are going to continue to escalate through that period, simply based on supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping them think through, well, what we need to do is think about when to buy them or when to contract them versus just buying them right before the Mother's Day promotion so we
Yeah.
can put chocolate covered strawberries in every casino. And then two, helping them think about the simple philosophy of, I call it, full truckloads in, full truckloads out. Don't buy anything that doesn't move in a full truckload, because basically you're subsidizing the empty capacity in a truck.
Mm-hmm.
So teaching them, okay, instead of asking the supplier for a price on a product, we're going to go to the supplier and say, where do you ship full truckloads? And we're going to buy it from there. And then ideally what we were going to do was consolidate the freight portion of it, right? Let's only buy products from suppliers who ship full truckloads into US Foods or Cisco or one of the top distributors, right? And sort of flipping the paradigm on its head. Instead of fighting for cost all the time, let's look for the efficiencies in the system. And it was, it's had its challenges, kind of, getting folks to think. But in the end, when we'd run those workshops with the individual properties and say, okay, here's your new catalog. You no longer have 20,000 SKUs to buy. You have 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
We went from 20,000 to 2,000 at each property and still service the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So folks are buying things of different prices and different quality. And we were able to say, hey, if we set up a framework for sort of a good, better, best, and then we properly catalog and you buy according to the program, we're going to drive cost out of the system. And the big takeaway was that suddenly what they didn't realize was they thought because they bought a lot of stuff from a supplier, it made them a valued customer.
Mm-hmm.
What made them an even more valued customer, the distributors, was, is this a valuable piece of business because it's efficient for me, right? Are they buying stuff? Do I have to go move a quarter truckload of some rare product into my distribution center and then move it and sell it and then sit on dead stock, right? From time to time. It's like, no, if you will buy from me all the stuff that moves in full truckloads, and then you guys buy big enough, you're moving full truckloads to a property. We're doing full truckloads in, full truckloads out. And then because the business was so attractive, the distributors were willing to pay to acquire the business, right? Instead of us just negotiating better prices on products, which we did, they were also willing to say, oh, wow, this is a piece of business that we'd like to have for the next 5 years in this structure because we know we can make money doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very interesting paradigm to sort of flip that on its head with a large team across the entire country. And there was even I'll sort of end on one funny note. As we were rolling that program out, there was 1 week. So I had to hit the proper, we sort of grouped properties, and I flew from my home in Savannah to Pennsylvania to Kansas City to New Mexico to Las Vegas to Chicago and home just to go and roll out these workshops and help the properties adopt. And it was kind of funny. I designed that trip because I wanted it to be like running the gauntlet and helping the team. But it was a memorable experience, great client. And it brought together all the elements of, as we worked every single food category. Who's the best? Who should we be buying beef from? Who should we be buying poultry from? Who should we be buying every single SKU? And that piece of work still remains sort of a really cornerstone piece of work within the firm. We distribute that as an example of what a really good SKU rationalization, product rationalization, efficiency-driven approach to procurement looks like. I'm very proud of that piece of work.
And I think SKU rationalization is I mean it's an initiative that's used in manufacturing, right? It's a, I hate to say this, is a quote unquote lever or a way to optimize spend for spare parts management, right? If you're an e-com company, but the in the food space, it's somewhat unique because just taking out cost is wrought with risk, right? I mean, if you're in the restaurant business, you've got to deal with, culinary strategy and culinary operations considerations, unpredictable customer demand, changing customer needs, right? Competition, all those types of things. But I think the work that you did there from a SKU rationalization, I could see as being, and I know you've done this in other sub industries, but relevant in grocery, right? Hotel, broader hospitality, food service distribution, restaurant groups, even facilities management. Companies that are delivering catering for their own end clients, right? Just I can't remember who the chef was. I remember, one of these TV shows where the chef goes in and helps. The restaurant's about to close down, and the chef will look at the menu and come up with innovative ideas to kind of improve the margin. I remember one where I think they cut the scallops in half and then just said, turn it on its side. The end customer won't know the difference, and you've half the cost on the individual plate. Like, those things do happen, but
They
doing
do.
that at scale year over year, right? And then
Right.
exchanging out the quality of the product. There's risks if it's not done properly. So many different stakeholders that need to be involved and nuances. I think your approach to it, and the way that you've done it with some of these key experts for clients, I think is kind of cool. What was the it, has there obviously been, if I go to a grocery store, you just turn over some of the packages, right? And there's every country in the world, right? And it's always amazing to see that. Have you seen, we see reshoring in other parts of the business, right? With people moving more closely because of supply chain challenges and risk that everyone, irrelevant of where you live or industry you're in, if you're buying product, has been a consideration in the last four to
Yes.
5 years. Have you seen a reshoring and a move, people looking for closest agricultural sources across your clients? Is
Yeah.
that a big shift or is that something that's just starting or?
Yeah. So I would say the shift is one in agriculture. The shifts have occurred. It's more about the source of supply. So when we think of reshoring, we think a lot about where the product is going to be made,
Mhm.
right? Versus where I'm just going to source materials. I think
Yeah.
in the food business, it's largely driven by where am I going to source materials. Well, you
Okay.
source materials where it's in season,
Mhm.
where it's actually growing and available at that time, and two is not affecting foodborne illness or other effects like the war in Ukraine that would drive shortages. So the business has been encultured to kind of move around the globe at all times, trying to find places to get raw materials, meaning
Mhm.
produce, even animal protein and so forth, wherever the benefits are. For example, Ukraine example, but even in a domestic example, avian flu. I had an egg client during avian flu, a shelled egg company during avian flu. They were having to kill large parts of their flock just to service the business, right? And then birds just don't suddenly grow. They've got the bird doesn't grow to a producing level tomorrow. I mean, that's the same with all animal protein, right? There's a replacement cycle. Now, certainly good, we call it flock management, right? There's flock management where you're growing new birds into the flock at all times, but just managing through those risks. And I think on an international level, the organic grains risk with Ukraine, it's not something new to food. It's
Mhm.
something that goes on all the time. For example, they had fires in Chile that wiped out a large portion of the grape crop in the I say it was 2015 or 2016. So there's this total shift in where people were buying grapes to make wine. Things of that nature are real and present in the industry. I think production continues to be domestic. I think the other element is the US is still feeding a large portion of the world, right?
Mhm.
Our food production system and our supply chain is sophisticated enough here in the world that we export a lot of food.
Mhm.
And the impacts of international trade and how we export are very real, right? And it's not just, um, if other countries that we are suddenly exporting tons of our corn and our soybeans and other things to assign tariffs to that, right? It's almost the forefront of economic warfare. I hate, it's frightening to use that word, but as we enter a world where there's sort of a very adversarial global approach to where the economic alliances are forming, um, it, how that stuff plays out has a real impact. And two, that's why you see, people talk about farm subsidies and um, how much money our government puts into farm subsidies, right? And in times when things are going really well, everyone's like, "Oh my God, the farmers are they're fattening up on federal subsidies, right? And it creates tons of inefficiencies." Well, you know what? Think about the risk of not having a viable supply chain,
Mhm.
right? The so-called most the largest economy in the world not having a viable food supply chain. Well, we're feeding ourselves, but we're also exporting a large portion of our food production around the globe and helping feed other countries that don't have the advancements in agriculture that we do, don't have the sophistication of supply chain. So, I think as Americans, we can take pride in the fact that our our supply chains help
Hmm.
feed the world and do good things around the globe as well.
So that's an interesting point around the supply chain. Ultimately, the risks are real; they happen all the time, and it's business as usual, right? Constantly looking for new sources. Presumably, changes in temperatures around the world are shifting where a lot of those ingredients are optimal to grow and
Mhm.
farm, right? Which also shifts, the need to look for alternate sources on a regular basis. There's global disruption, politics at play as well as economics. I mean, that kind of makes it a lot more interesting than people would generally realize. But also a need to have different experts available at different points in time, right? To battle with those challenges potentially that have nuanced insights around certain parts of the world that perhaps you or your team haven't sourced from
Yes.
in the past. That maybe have interesting ways of looking things from a SKU rationalization standpoint. And I've done those kind of end to end SKU rationalization, cost optimization programs across a group of stakeholders that don't normally necessarily talk to each other, from chefs to the facilities management organization to the supply chain team, etc. So I think that makes it it's a complex topic, complex subject, but one that needs deep expertise, which I think is cool. So we'll wrap up because we're keeping these things relatively short. What's your If you had to look out 12 to 24 months, what do you see coming down the pipeline? If organizations out there just looking for some general guidelines or tips on trends that might appear, that they'll need to be prepared for from a food supply chain perspective. Is there anything that hasn't happened before that you see potentially coming down the pipeline, or maybe something that's already happened before that you just think is something they need to keep top of mind and be prepared for?
Yes, I know. I won't say that there's something that folks haven't seen before, but I'd say there's a couple accelerants
Okay.
that will continue to affect the world, are increasingly affecting the outlook today, and will probably continue to affect, even through different political regimes, affect going forward. Right, the effect of a lot of the environmental initiatives on the ability to produce fertilizer. Right,
Hmm.
this is a very real. There's a lot of pressure on food production, the perception that food production has a large environmental footprint, and the pressure being placed on agriculture to reduce its environmental footprint. And I think, right, we're all supportive of being good stewards of the environment, but I think there has to be an understanding of the impact. And we're seeing, pushback in Europe. We're seeing pushback here in the U.S. on
Hmm.
some of the regulations, and I think that's going to continue to be a hot area to monitor. Right? I think we're at the, as I like to say, we're sort of at the, I don't want to say the apex, but the food TV and celebrity chefs and all these things are really mature concepts now, but the expectations of food are higher than they've ever been, right?
Hmm.
What people expect from food products and quality, and then you layer in, I want to understand the, ESG type components and DEI type components of how my food is made and where it comes from and things like that. I think those are really, you know, sort of keeping your finger to the wind. I think a lot of companies have to continue to keep their eye on it. They want to kind of run their companies in the commercialized food production type of way that we've become accustomed to, but there's some challenges there, right? But it's a place where the business has weathered other challenges in the past,
Hmm.
and the players in the value chain are accustomed to the variability of different economic and environmental conditions. And if any industry is equipped to kind of weather and adapt, it's the parties in the foods value chain that I would say they're hardy. It's a hardy group, and they'll find new ways to bring new products to market, find new ways to optimize cost, and find new ways to feed the world we live in today.
Pretty innovative as well if you think about the new types of
Yes.
products, right? Lab grown meat, just the availability of certain product groups or choice. I think as you were saying that, I mean, it resonates with me. At any grocery store you can now go to in North America, and most countries around the world have organic options, right? Whereas in previously it was only specialty
Right.
stores, limited availability, and yeah, we're constantly asking for more. We want everything to be more sustainable, healthier in general, right? But we also want more availability, and we want it now, right? It's kind of, yeah, the consumer demand doesn't always go in the direction that people might think, and
We think about our generation where you ate what mom put on the table, right?
yeah, for
That's
sure,
changed, right?
yeah,
Um, Folks of all ages and interest and taste want interesting food,
mm-hmm,
healthy food, different, innovative food, and people are consuming in different places and at different times than ever before.
mm-hmm,
Thinking about how to eat food on the move is a major. It's an initiative that's it's always alive within all of my clients. How do you create food that can be eaten on the move? We're
mm-hmm.
on the move as a society. So those
Yeah,
types of, I mean, it comes very close to the person, right? How you interact with food and how it's consumed affects all of us. And we all have our own interesting nuances as to how we like to consume it, when we like to consume it, and where we like to consume it. This has been a great discussion, Simon. I really appreciate the time.
all right, well, thank you. Anyone who's listening or seeing this on the recording, audio or video, any questions, topics to discuss that might be relevant to your organization, anything food, literally anything food or supply chain related, Howard will definitely have a point of view and be willing to chat through. So feel free to reach out direct. Appreciate your time, Howard. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Simon. Have a great weekend.